And finally, a lot of the legislative interventions that have been attempted in the past, particularly in our program and other programs, but probably particularly in ours, they ultimately have not had the long-term intended benefit. The four-tiered waiver system is a great example. First implemented, 5,000 people, it didn't get implemented because they filed a due process. But it did reduce costs. That's primarily why we spent less last year than we spent back in 2006-07. But it's not precise. It's not precise. There's still, that budget is starting to grow. The budget's growing. Litigation is still ongoing today. When we first did that, when we first implemented the four-tiered waiver system, there were 5,000 due process appeals. Roughly half of those appeals were from people who were not adversely affected. In other words, they were not going to have to lose services. They just appeal because somebody told them they ought to. In fact, down in Palm Beach County, there was a press release from the United Way that said, exercise your right to an appeal because it will bring the wheels of government to a grinding halt. And just so you all understand, 5,000 cases is about what our Division of Administrative Hearings, which at that time heard these cases, that is their typical workload for an entire year for all of state government and all of the local governments that use Division of Administrative Hearings, also called DOA. That's the acronym. Almost 500 of those people were people who were in Tier 1. It couldn't get any better for them. Those kinds of things, and I just want to be honest with you all, those kind of things cause great frustration with policymakers. Because at that point in time, if you're already in Tier 1, you have to ask yourself, is this just people being abusive? Because you can't get any better than Tier 1. I mean, what is it? They want less? They're suing us to give us less. I mean, we'll settle that. So just understand that all of the actions and reactions, it's a very complicated scene, and it's a complicated history that has gotten us to where we are today. And a lot of what led, I believe, to the House proposal that came out, I believe it was either in week 6 or week 7 of a 9-week legislative session. I didn't hear about it. I didn't see this bill until the day it was noticed. They never talked to me about it until the day it was noticed. Again, I believe it was in week 7 of a 9-week session. So obviously there wasn't a whole lot of public vetting, and I think that bill took a lot of people by surprise, particularly when it had the developmental disabilities, home and community-based services waiver included within it. So one thing I wanted to share with you all is, since we've not had a lot of opportunities to speak to the members or really the staff involved with that bill, there is a letter that one of the representatives, who is going to be the incoming appropriations chairman, and I believe was the House sponsor of the bill, Representative Denise Grimsley, from down around Sebring, I believe. Sebring is where she's from, not too far from here. And in this letter, she lays out some of the issues that the House is trying to address. And I apologize, I'm not really an expert on what the House is trying to do. Again, the communication has been somewhat limited here. One of the things she mentions is a feeling that managed care will improve care coordination. I think what that really means is that the case managers a function that's currently performed by our independent waiver support coordinators, people that you as a family member or you as a consumer, you hire and fire, you choose. They won't work for you anymore. They'll work for the managed care organization. You would in all likelihood lose your ability to choose those. Okay, I'm just saying, I think you would probably lose your ability to choose your case manager or your support coordinator. And these people would work for the managed care organization rather than for you. Also, she mentions that she feels that managed care will somehow improve the quality of care. Not sure exactly how that would happen, unless she's talking that it would limit the number of providers who are allowed to participate. So rather than the system we have today where we enroll any willing provider that's willing to take, that meets certain basic qualifications, and who is willing to take the payment rate, your managed care organization would have the ability to whittle down the number of providers. Now, whether that leads to better quality of care is a function of whether they do a good job of picking good providers, and whether they do a good job of overseeing those providers. She also mentions that she feels it will improve cost effectiveness. Now, that's an interesting one, because we have one of the cheapest systems in the United States today in terms of what it costs the taxpayers to run it and to provide services. I believe we are 47th in terms of what it costs. Out of the 50 states, we're 47th in terms of what it costs per taxpayer to run our waiver program. Arizona, probably the one example of managed care that's most commonly cited is almost double what Florida is on that key measure of cost effectiveness. We're the top 5 in the nation in terms of serving people in their own home or in a family home. Those are the most cost-effective service delivery settings that there are. We are one of the states, we just closed the Gulf Coast Center. We are one of the states that we have relatively few institutional placements. Ironically enough, in the House bill, the state-owned and operated institutions were exempt from being part of managed care. So one of the places that a managed care organization might go to achieve savings is off the table, because institutional placements are by far, on average, the most expensive placement setting that we have, the most expensive service alternative that we have. The bottom line is that Florida is already doing pretty well in some areas that have a direct relationship to cost effectiveness. And finally, let me just read a passage, because I think this is really what sums up what's happening. And I feel like I can read it, and you can hear it in her words rather than mine. The Medicaid program of the future needs to serve more people with less money. I think that's the bottom line. Let me continue reading. When confronted with such problems, the only solutions available in the current system of care are blunt instruments, rate cuts, service eliminations, spending limits, etc. Of course, that begs the question, what kind of magic dust exists where you have, I think those are the only alternatives if you want to save money, if you want to spend less. Either serve fewer people, but if you're going to serve more people, and more people with less money, you're going to either cut, you have to cut the amount of money that you spend per person. There's no other way around it. More people and less money means less money per person spending. And there's only two ways you can get there. Reduce provider rates, reduce availability of services. Some of the other strategies that may be available for savings in other states that rely more heavily on deep-end residential, that rely more heavily on institutionalization. Those kinds of savings, by pursuing less expensive alternatives that may actually be preferable, those opportunities are largely missing in Florida because we're ahead of the curve in those areas. Let me just give you a few particulars as I know them of the House bill. And again, I'm not the expert. It is unfortunate that we couldn't get someone from the House to be here to explain their bill in more detail. But I did, of course, read the bill. Parts of it are etched into my memory banks, probably, and will take with me to the grave. First of all, it would there would be a limited number of managed care organizations operating in each of several regions in the state. I think it's like 5 or 6 regions in the state. The Agency for Healthcare Administration would be totally in charge of the procurement process, oversight, and management of these managed care organizations. APD is given a role, but it is a consultative role. But ACA is also given the ability to delegate additional duties and responsibilities to APD as they see fit. It does not really guarantee any kind of oversight or management role to our agency, the Agency for Persons with Disabilities. ACA is pretty much in charge. It covers private ICFs, home and community-based services waiver, and primary and acute care. So everyone will be enrolled in a managed care organization, and there is a provision in that bill that if a company feels they can do both the primary and acute care and the social services, the long-term care, the home and community-based services, it's conceivable that you might have one company doing both. As I said earlier, it exempts the state-run institutions. And the reason that's notable is because that is one of our more expensive, that is the most expensive service delivery setting, at least if you look at an average. Now, interestingly, in every other state that I've ever spoken to personally, and I've spoken, I believe, to most of them that have big managed care systems for our population, they don't have waiting lists. That's probably one of the primary advantages to what we've seen with managed care in other states is you don't have that ability to have a waiting list. In other words, the managed care organization has to take all eligible companies. But that particular bill limited eligibility for the managed care product to people